Hello, system thinkers. Welcome to the recap for episode 072. I'm joined by my friend Doug Neiner. Doug, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Glad to join you.
Yeah, we just finished the deep dive, and so we had a little break, 15 minutes maybe, and we are jumping right back in to talk about some of the things that we learned from the community in the deep dive call. Let me give you a quick overview of what we covered. So the topic this week was extreme design system support. Doug and I had a great conversation about this concept prior to the deep dive, and we asked you all 4 different questions. The first was, how would you describe the support that your design system program currently offers to consuming teams? And we gave you a long list of options to choose from. The second question, with no constraints, how would you change your design system support program? The third question, what are the constraints that keep you from implementing that level of support? And we gave you a handful of options to choose from as well. And the fourth and final question was, describe a time when going above and beyond in supporting a consuming team had a meaningful impact on adoption, relationships, or the system itself. We sent this out to over 1,000 folks, 1,081 design system practitioners. We got 49 responses. And as always, wherever you're listening or watching this episode, you can get the link to the raw data and do your own analysis. Doug, I want to start with you. Like we had these 2 questions, question 1 and 3, where we gave folks a handful of options to choose. And we said, check all that apply. Tell me sort of what you saw in the data for those. Was there anything that stood out to you?
Yeah, the one thing was you had separated out written and video documentation, and written is maybe in the 90 percentile and video documentation is maybe 25%.
Yeah.
So that was it makes sense when I saw it, but that was a big discrepancy. We didn't kind of we got a little bit off track talking about perfectionism and design systems, and maybe that impacts our ability to produce videos that are easy to produce. The other one was that there was almost 50% of the respondents said they have access to development environments to help debug, which was much higher than I expected.
Yeah,
so
that
was really interesting.
Lift. Yeah, I love that. And I was with you on this, Doug. I've not really heard system teams talking about that very often. So it's really cool to see it exposed here in the data. You're right. Big difference between written and video docs. I think I'm biased here because I'm so used. So we're on episode 72. I produce video a lot in my own life. And so the tooling that's available these days has really lowered the bar in terms of the effort it takes to do that. So nice. Tools like what this is Riverside that we use to record our recaps, even just using Zoom, like it'll do an edit for you that has primary speaker over top of a screen share. So you can use those tools that folks really do have access to sort of really lower the bar for entry on this. But it's so funny because you said, "Ooh, I wonder what the difference is, what the overlap is between system practitioner and perfectionist." So we asked the community to draw us a little Venn diagram, and we got a pretty good sense for like a lot of us living in that middle ground,
Yeah.
I see you, Doug, are perfectly centered. So
I had to be. I mean, how can you be a perfectionist and not be perfectly centered in the middle?
That's so funny, man. So funny. But awesome. I love it when we come up with a quick poll like that and we can get folks into the Fig Jam to help us sketch it out. Anything that you saw in that second, more quantitative question?
And just that one is, what are the constraints that keep you from implementing this level of support? One thing that was really positive is that unclear ownership barely made the chart. Maybe about 5% answered with that. The biggest contenders there were headcount or bandwidth, which makes total sense. The smaller the team, the less you can accomplish. And then competing priorities. That one was interesting. I'm wondering, given the success that comes from high levels of support, what priorities would be competing with that? That one's interesting. And I imagine it has something to do with, we didn't really get into this in the call, but the deliverables, the components, the new things can compete with the level of support teams would want to provide. So that was interesting. That was very high, maybe about, what would you say, 75%?
Yeah. 2/3, maybe a little bit more. I love that you called out the unclear ownership. That was something I saw in this. And I think I feel like I'm somebody who has been advocating for customer support roles on design system teams for a long time because I know how important this is. And
Sure.
nobody does that. It's always like, we're going to pass the pager, basically. Like, that's how it used to be when I was,
Yes.
in engineering. It was like I had to take a pager home once a month or something, and it was
Sure.
systems go down and I get the call and I have no idea what to do because I'm not a support person. You know what I mean? Like, it is a unique skill set in a sense. And I think we maybe ignore that partly. So I love this idea that unclear ownership is low. What that means to me is that design system teams recognize this as part of our role,
Yeah.
And so now it's just a matter of like, within the constraints we have to operate in, how do we do that well,
Yeah. That's great.
Will you, Doug, just give us, so, not everybody knows you and I, so I'd love for you to just give us a sense for what if you had to sort of describe in a minute or two what your, support approach looks like for the system at Planview. Tell us sort of how you approach it.
Yeah, sure. So we have different, obviously we maintain written documentation, both of our design documentation. That's I'm trying to remember what Kevin always calls it, but it's the normative truth. It's the thing that's supposed to answer the question of, is it correct or not? We maintain storybook documentation. So we do all those things. We have an open Slack support channel for both the designers and the developers. They're separate. So we don't mix those two. It's open, people can join both. But then beyond the basic things, we're constantly, we do onboardings with new teams that come on and we walk them through what's available. It's not super formal. It's not pre-recorded. It's something that we do ad hoc as new teams come on board. But the thing I like the most is whenever there's a defect, I try to run. Planview has a bunch of different products that they've acquired or built over the years. So there's a lot of different teams. I try to get those running locally because the fastest way for me to provide support is to be able to pull down someone's branch, run the code, see the problem they're experiencing, identify is it a defect for us, is a defect in their code, and often can just push commit to their unmerged branch that's going to be reviewed. But I can push a commit that fixes the problem, or I can go with them and give them very confident help. Telling someone to try this and try that and try this is not super effective. But we try to provide that deep level of support, either replicating the issue in our own systems if we can't run theirs, or getting on the screen share with them and finding out the issue, quickly identifying, do we have a defect? Is this something we can help them with? So a lot of that comes direct. Like, there'll be some posts in our public channel, but then a lot of it comes directly to either the other developer on our team or myself. And we just deal with those one-on-ones because some people aren't comfortable asking in a public channel.
Yeah. And I want to come back to this idea of, like direct messages or private messages versus sort of conversation in open channels. But I know that a lot of folks answered that they have access to dev environments, but for you to talk about it in this way, I hear you saying it's more than that. It's not that I have access. It's that you do the work to get these products running locally so that you can really understand. You're talking about like increasing the proximity. You want to be closer to the metal for this, You're in the weeds, you're understanding what it's like to be a consumer in a sense. Is that fair?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And it's frustrating. So that involves obviously going through different permissionings for access to different repositories. I think the most extreme example is I worked with my boss to get we work on Mac primarily, but I got a Planview issued PC. So I don't know if I'm the only one in the company with two PCs, a PC and a Mac, but that was so I could run one of the products, which was really, it was too heavy to run in the cloud. Well, it's like a virtual private computer. And then so they got me a PC so I could test on that. And that's probably the most extreme case where, so I could run their product and give them the best support. But it was worth it because it was one of our largest products. So it was worth the effort.
Man, that is legitimate support from leadership to have them be willing to kind of go through. I know what a headache it is to deal with all of that stuff with your infra team or whatever, security team, whatever that is.
Right.
Gosh, that's really cool that they see the value in that sort of level of support. That's neat.
Yeah, it's been really cool. And again, being able to, it's just so much easier to say, oh, I see your branch, I see an issue, in the support versus like, send me a screenshot of your code.
Yeah. Oh my
It's
gosh,
just
dude. Yeah.
it's so much more effective if we can self-serve when we're helping.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so let's come back to the idea of, DMs or private messages versus open channels. I think you're slowly converting me here. I've been an advocate for having these channels to be very open, and I know that you're not saying you shouldn't have open channels, but
right.
But you are very much okay with somebody just DMing you, and I've always liked the idea of an open channel because I want other people to see the questions and other people to be able to chime in and answer. But tell me what's been valuable for you on the direct message or private message front.
And I think this is so interesting. There's two things going on here. One is I don't know. It's an idea of personal. I'm trying to think how to answer your question, because there was one piece we didn't get into in the larger call that I wanted to talk about. Not everyone is comfortable asking their question in a public channel. They may be unsure about their own competence and worry that it's a dumb question. They may just don't want to bother random people. I, for one, almost never will post in a very public forum asking a question. I just not who I am. I will find the person that can help me and I'll ask them directly.
Yeah.
Occasionally, as a last resort, I'll ask in a public channel. It's just the way I'm wired. And so I think maybe I'm more disposed to allow other people the same courtesy.
Yeah.
I think the more we try to streamline, the less touch points we get, and then we don't know which conversations we've missed. Think about a ticketing system. Most IT departments have ticketing systems. Sure, it's super effective for them, but it's really awkward to use. And you're trying to raise a request, and it's asking you to pre-categorize your request, and it's asking, I don't know these. I don't know which department and how you have this set up. I just know I have a problem and I need your help. So I like that we've kept it very fluid. The more we build trust, people start to ask in the public channel. We see that once we've answered some questions in private, then they'll feel comfortable asking in the public channel. Sometimes I have to tell them, hey, I'd love to help you, but you're in a different time zone. Ask my coworker. He's over in Europe. He'll be able to help you. So sometimes I do have to ask them to ask in a different forum. But most of the time, we can just answer the questions directly, and it builds connection. So I think we should be very careful about streamlining for our own efficiency when it's not as effective. Some people just aren't comfortable doing that.
Gosh, you said that well in the deep dive, and I wrote it down right here. You said, it's not always about efficiency. It's about building trust and effectiveness. And I love that as a quote. I mean, I think it's so true. It's really, especially because system teams can be small and isolated, and we're asked, we talked about this in the call, the boundaries of system work are blurry, like what is our responsibility and what is not. It's never black and white, And so I think, with a small team, gosh, it's like, it's easy to try to think, let's just make this easier on us. But you're right. Maybe doing that reduces the effectiveness in some ways.
So I'll take it one step further.
Okay.
Have you ever been working with a team and they're like, create a ticket, create an issue? It's like, ends a conversation and you have to go somewhere else. So I do it sometimes on occasion with people that we work with for a while. Say, hey, that's a great idea. Can you create a card on our board? And they're comfortable with that. We use our product, Agile Place, to manage our work. But most of the time, I will create the card, I will capture the details, and then I will provide the link back to the person that asked the support request to say, hey, here's the defect that you reported that we're tracking here. That way, if they want to do it, but it's just that extra step of, I'm not looking to offload the work as quickly as possible. I'm looking to make the person feel heard. Their thing's going to be taken seriously. So even in that level, it's much more efficient if they create the issue, but they don't know which categorization to give it, which other thing to do. So I want to do that for them. So that's just some pet peeves I have with efficiency in large organizations.
Man, that's so insightful. You're prioritizing the relationship over the efficiency is what it sounds like.
Yeah. I don't know that I was thinking of it that way, but yes, I think that's probably right.
Yeah. I just was playing around a little bit because when I started looking through the answers, you know how I love a good quadrant diagram. It's like,
I thought we could have used that for the perfectionism one too. Like,
we could
from perfectionist to pragmatic. Where are you?
I love it. I love it. Okay, we'll redo that one. But I just was thinking about how a lot of the challenges here were the idea of scale versus effort. Like it's almost like, how do we reach the most people? and with the team that we have, essentially, right? So it's like an acknowledgement of a small team in a large org. We have to think in terms of scale. Guy pointed out, well, how do we overlay impact, right? And I think this gets at the nuance of some of this stuff, because on the surface, one of the answers we gave folks was to the first question, how would you describe the support your system offers, was this idea of we embed in consuming teams, meaning a design system team member goes and works inside of a consuming team to help support them, to help them learn about the system, to help them see how the system works, all of those kinds of things. And when I initially sketched this out, just kind of quickly before the call, I put embedded in consuming teams in the top left, meaning it's low scale, but it's high effort.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we talked about this, the more we saw, and if you look through the raw data and you get a chance to read the answers to question 4, which was us asking people to tell stories about impact, you can see that a lot of folks felt that when they do this kind of work, when they take the time to actually embed, get to know the product, get to know the team building the product, what they're doing is more than just supporting them. They're actually turning them into advocates for the system. And there's a exponential impact that has, because those advocates will then answer questions for you, right? So they become your support in a sense.
Yeah.
They also are just straight up advocates. They're telling everybody about the work, so there's a lot of benefit to that. Has that been your experience, or?
Yeah. The more time I spend with the teams, that it pays off in a number of ways, right? It pays off in less questions going forward, more self-service, like those things. Sure, you can tell someone you have docs and tell them a million times, but when you're pairing with them and you're referencing your own docs, our design system's to a point, I can't remember everything, what every prop is named. So during our screen sharing sessions, I'm pulling up our docs. I'm finding, okay, that's what that prop is called. So I think you're modeling some of those things. So I think there's a huge level of effectiveness gained, where not only are they seeing, and then they're looking at during the reviews, the things that you're calling out, the things that are important, the things you're paying attention to. So I think there's a huge impact from that, even though it doesn't, you can't scale it to 1 million teams if you have only 4 people.
Yeah.
But it pays off more, I think, than you put into it.
Yeah. And we had a brief conversation about maybe the other side of this coin. One of the responses I thought was really just like interesting to read. And this was one of our respondents who has a fairly large system team for a smaller sized organization. And, she said that they do quite a bit of very hands-on work with consuming teams. And that has definitely led to strong adoption. But she also had this statement in the 4th question where she said, our work is very high touch, and I sometimes think that it burns out our design system team. And so, I think this to me was like, what's the balance? It's kind of the way I was trying to think about this. Maya asked this in the deep dive. She said, when are we hand-holding too much versus empowering teams with skills and knowledge to self-serve? And I get it. Like, this is not an easy thing to figure out. I kind of put you on the spot in the call, Doug, and I was like, how do you tell? Like, what's your, like, I think you probably have been doing this long enough that you have a good intuition around this, but like, tell us sort of like objectively, how do you make a decision on whether a specific support request is worth the hand holding, worth the investment,
Yeah. So you're always trying to give the answer that gets them unblocked at a minimum. The question is, do you then take further steps? Do you get on a call to explain all the nuance about your answer and those things? And for me, if code is shared, even in the case of the question, you can sometimes sense there's such a significant gap between the question that's being asked or the code that's being written and where it needs to be, that you realize that they're not at a point to be able to benefit from that deeper mentorship. They need a more basic skill, education maybe, or experience or anything. I'm not criticizing the people at all, but you recognize that maybe this is a back-end developer that's been thrown on a front-end task. They're going to be back on database migrations next week. this is probably not the time to explain the philosophy behind how our accessibility, approach is
Yeah.
going to be impacting here, pointing out that these things are wrong. So I think some of it is just when the gap between where they need to be and where they are is so significant, you're more tactical in your response. Oh, don't do this, do this. Down to giving them a code snippet, just replace what you have with this. Sometimes that will be it. And they, oh, thanks, they're unblocked, they're happy. And I don't think any education happened. It's more like the live Stack Overflow answer. But at the same point, you've still built trust because it was another positive touch point with that team. So it's still beneficial, but
yeah, I like that. And I think I've experienced this in my own life as I'm somebody who just loves to learn. And I think there are these seasons where I'm like, I'm tackling some new thing that I've never done before. And I like to go deep. So I'll start research and I may find somebody who's way more advanced in a specific topic than me. And I look at their stuff and it makes no sense to me because I am so far behind that I can't learn from them. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I have to find sort of the stuff that's just ahead of where I am. And then at some point a year later, maybe I find that same thing and it makes so much more sense to me, So maybe there's a timing thing,
Yeah, or you're so you don't even know the term to search for to find the answer. That's how. Yeah, I know the feeling. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, and that's fine. And people are different parts of their journey. It just the time you spend, you want it to be, helpful to them, and not just all go over their head and they go, okay, thanks.
Yeah. And this is a little bit off topic, but I want to take an opportunity to say this because I think it's really important for people to hear it. This is like a reason. This is, in my mind, why it's everybody's responsibility to share what they're learning in their moment in this season, because there's somebody who's a little bit further behind you who needs what you know. And you don't have to be the one at the very end who's got everything figured out to publish a thing, to write a thing, to share it, to speak at a conference. So that's a huge deal. And I know that's not what we're talking about here, but I think I'm trying to get more people to share, to share what they're learning.
No, I agree. And I completely agree. Share where you're at. Don't worry about the other stuff. There will always be someone able to benefit from that.
Yes, 100%. All right. So we spent quite a bit of time, like we were, the respondents and everybody attending the deep dive were very drawn to this idea of embedding. And so we had a lot of conversation around embedding. Sean had some really good advice. Sean used to run the system at Spotify, and he said we had a reverse embedding process that he walked everybody through. So I asked him to drop it into that FigJam. So wherever you're listening, there's also a link to the FigJam file. You can get into that and you can see Sean's process. It was like, there was a scope document, there's a run book, which is basically like, how do you onboard somebody quickly? Everybody got an embed buddy. So somebody that they could go to with questions. And then they had that playbook, which was just like put together a presentation of what they learned essentially. So really nice, concise way to approach embedding. And this was the reverse embedding, right? So this was having a consuming team come work on the system team. And the reason Sean was sharing here was because one of the things that we've also observed is having folks join your team all the time, only for a short season, can be very disruptive to a team. So I think it's really interesting to see he addressed that by creating a really strong process, and a series of steps to follow. You guys haven't done the reverse. Is that right, Doug? Or
once.
Once, okay.
I think there might have been twice. I'm trying to remember. I think it was just once that we took in, we had a basic internship. We didn't call it, that was more of an internship with a product designer on the design system team.
Yeah.
And fast forward a year or two later, and that designer is full-time on the design system team now.
Oh, okay.
But it had a huge impact at the time still, just to have them think through and see it from a different perspective. It's not about what's best in this instance. It's about what's best across the system, what can be consistent. So even the mind shift between tactical product development and the systems development was, I think, quite beneficial to the designer.
Yeah, I love that. Alexander also had a really good story. He's in the system that he used to work on. He talked about this idea of like, when we've had opportunities to send design system team members out to consuming teams, we had misaligned incentives. And so he talked about this idea where a product team or a consuming team just needed more bodies. They needed more people, on a project. And so they took a system designer or developer onto the team, but they weren't really there to do systems work or help spread that sort of systems knowledge. Instead, they were just somebody to move cards. And so, of course, there's a little bit of benefit. They're going to gain some empathy for what it's like to be a consumer and that sort of thing. But if the incentives aren't aligned, like if it's not clear why we're doing this, I could see how that would create a lot of friction, So interesting story,
Yeah, it was. It was also interesting. If you're going to go to the effort of embedding, it needs to provide value to the embedding team, not just provide value back to the design system
That's true.
team. So you have to be able to take up some of those other things. But if what he described was they were just kicking everything design system related over to that embedded resource or embedded person, and then what do you call it? They weren't no one was learning anything, and that person was doing that work. So it didn't sound particularly helpful.
Not getting the real benefit there. I also really loved Rebecca's point. She called out this idea that, like, in her work on systems, she said, you can identify, just as in any organization, you can always tell who's like a helper and who's a blocker, And I think her point here was really well stated, which is, as systems teams, we have to be perceived as helpers. If we're blockers, people will just go around us or stop coming to us. And she also made this really strong point, which is like, if you lose the reputation as a helper, it's actually really hard to get it back. And I loved this perspective, and it gets to just like the posture of a system team, and what should it be? So cool. What else, man? What else stood out to you about the conversation?
Well, one of the things we didn't get into, which is kind of in hindsight interesting, we didn't actually talk about the insight you get when you're embedded in a team to the issues with your own design system, with the way the components don't work the way expected, or they don't have the flexibility that you need and stuff. So there's that entire facet we didn't really discuss, but it's not just about the trust you built with the team, the advocates you formed. It's also about the real-time feedback that goes, that thing I thought through was going to be this way is actually a pain in the neck to deal with. What can we do to fix that? So to me, that's also super valuable, just to stay connected to the work and feel the pain that your consumers are feeling when they're using your components. Again, from a development perspective for me, but I imagine the same applies to designers as well.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's really easy to sort of stay isolated when you're on a system team and to not sort of get into the weeds of building product. But that is our user. And in the same way that we have to understand the users of our, customer facing products, we have to understand the users of our systems. And that's just good process, to follow. So I love that. The only last thing I remember us discussing was this idea of sort of like who to work with, and sort of in your explanation, I think we were leaning more towards like instinct. I have sort of an approach that I follow, which is I encourage teams this is not something that they share publicly, but we do little exercises where we sort of look across the org and say, okay, of all of our consumers, who's already an advocate and who's not, like who's kind of actively speaking out against the system or just doesn't want to engage. And of those folks, who has a lot of influence inside the organization and who doesn't? And if you can identify the folks with high influence who are, I call them saboteurs, but that's probably overstated, who are not active advocates for the system, that intersection is really interesting. It can be a scary group to work with, but if you can convert those folks into advocates, then you're getting influential people in the org who are actively fighting against the work to actively fight for it. And that's that turns the tide, in a lot of cases. Taylor had a great story about some of that, opportunity that he had as well when he was at Fidelity. So one nuance too to this is the person themselves doesn't have to be high influence if the thing they're working on is high impact to the company. So we have a bunch of products that Planview has in its portfolio, but there's a couple of them that are the heavy hitters. Yeah. And so if you can have an impact on those products, that has a lot more visibility when it comes to the senior leadership team and the different people. So even if that might be a little less scary to work into, you're not necessarily dealing with a C-level person you're trying to convert to an advocate. But if you're working with engineers or designers on influential product or an impactful feature in a product that's going to get a lot of visibility, you can
you can piggyback on that, help them be successful, and it in turn helps the design system be successful. So
yeah. And you're getting at like, what's the definition of influence? You know,
right.
in a lot of cases, it's follow the money, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
where's the money coming in? Like, who's making the most profit for the org? You know, like
Right.
that question will point you oftentimes at somebody you really got to work with, or a team, or a group of teams you got to support well. Gosh, we're almost done here, but we didn't really talk AI at all, Doug. How did we get through a whole session without talking about AI?
I don't know. It was mentioned occasionally.
Yeah.
You know, that was, you and I mentioned even in the pre-meeting before the call, but yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. I think folks talked about it in their answer to question 2, which was, which was more about, without constraints, how would you change your system support? And I think a lot of folks were interested in looking for ways to kind of automate things, you know, and they saw AI as a tool for potential automation of support. I think you and I are maybe wired the same, which is like, for me, when I get on a customer support call, if they give me some robot to talk to, I am instantly just trying to find the keyword to get me to a human, like talk to a person, talk to a human, you know, and I'll say that until somebody comes on to talk to me. So I don't know, but yeah.
I know I'm a little concerned. I have yet to meet a bot other than like a full LLM that can process and do more things that is helpful to me. I'm with you. I'm a little skeptical. And again, from all the things we said before, I'd be very careful to not reduce touch points with our consumers. Yes, I want them to be able to self-serve. If they're working in the middle of the night for some reason and they want to be able to answer questions, sure, help them out as much as we can. But I still want them to feel like they can reach out. I still want to hear about their pain points. I want to hear about the documentation that led them the wrong direction, so I can fix it and we can make it better. So
yeah, totally. Doug, I really appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming on. I know it takes a lot of work to do this show, and so for bringing an awesome question, for helping facilitate the deep dive, and also continuing to chat with me here in the recap. Thank you for your time and your expertise.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much for joining us on episode 072 of The Question. This format doesn't work unless folks like you are willing to share some of your experience and then show up here in learning mode. Remember, you can get access to the raw data, the collaborative Fig Jam, and all of the recordings for this episode and many more on my website, bencallahan.com. If you or your team could use an outside perspective on your design system program, I'd be honored to support you in that way. There's much more information about my individual and team coaching program over on the website. Thanks for being here, and remember, stay in learning mode.